So a client recently asked, what is the best bike for an older cross-country mountain biker? I'm not going to say it's the bike, but it's going to come down to some key features. Okay, geometry is the key here. So let me make a case. And let's forget about travel for the moment and just stick with what's probably best for you as an older cross-country rider. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say stability. And how do we get stability? Stability comes through balance in the bike, namely headtube angle, chainstay length. The buzz length for the chainstay in the industry right now is short, 430 to 432 for a 29er. When in fact, I think in this category of rider, you should be looking more like 435 to 445 or even longer. But that's not the only number that's important here. Headtube angle is also very important. Old cross-country race bikes would be 70-degree head angle, 69-degree head angle, nice and steep, because it gave you a really precise feel when you had to corner. And it was easy to keep the front end of that bike down in climbing and steer it where you needed it to go. But that's a racing situation. The drawback to an angle like that is when you start going fast, it becomes twitchy. When you need it to hold a line in a corner, it won't. By slackening out the head angle of the bike right around that 66.5 to 65, in that range, you start to get a bike with a lot more stability. Now, combine that with a longer rear end and you get a nice balance. Balance becomes your ultimate tool as an older rider. You don't have to think as much on the newer geometry about moving your body forward and backwards to maintain traction in a corner. You're more naturally centered. And in particular, if you are really tall, that longer chainstay makes a lot more sense. Now, you're getting older. The other thing that will become of utmost importance is comfort on the bike. So let's talk about stack. Cross-country race bikes typically had a very, very low stack. The idea being you win the race on the climbs, so you need to keep the front end down. So by having that low stack, you naturally put a lot of weight over the front wheel, which also gives you a lot of traction on flat corners and for climbing. However, as soon as you start to go down, you're going to feel like you're way over the bike. So having a higher stack will put you in a more comfortable riding position for the majority of your riding. And here's where a longer chainstay can also be beneficial. It doesn't get talked about very much. A longer chainstay will naturally put more weight over the front wheel than if you had a short chainstay. This effect will let you have a higher stack on the bike, and having a higher stack will give you more comfort and control on the bike. Now, I'm not talking massively high up in the air unless you really need it. I'm just saying that the longer chainstay lets you move the front end up a little bit higher so that you're in a more comfortable position. And with that longer chainstay, it's not sacrificing corner control or even keeping the front end down when climbing. This is really noticeable when you get into chainstays in the length of 445 millimeters. But all this is moot unless you consider travel as well. And I believe travel is more a factor of where you're riding and how you're going to ride the bike. I would say something between 115 and 140 mils in the rear and 120 to 150 in the front is probably ideal to get you through everything you're going to ride. Now, if you want that cross-country race feel, I would stick to the lower side of the travel because it'll just give you a better platform to pedal on. You may not notice it moving around as much. However, a little bit longer travel just gives you more control and the bike stays on the ground more effectively. And these days, longer travel does not mean an inefficient bike. The kinematics on the bikes now are so dialed in that in climbing, you're going to get very, very little pedal bob. When you're riding on flat ground in the appropriate gear, you're going to get very, very little, if no pedal bob. So I wouldn't say 140 mil travel bike will be a detriment to your riding. Like I said, it all comes down to the angles. So what would I say is great for this range? Well, I'd like to see you on a bike with 440, 445 millimeter chainstay if you're, under 6 feet. And if you're over, then you might want to find something a little bit longer, or something where you can change the wheelbase in the back end so that it's longer, the 450 plus range. Head angle, it would be nice to see anything, like I mentioned before, from about 66 to 65 and a half, 66 and a half, 65, somewhere in there. Seat angle can also become important in this equation. The trend right now is to have very, very steep seat angles, and while that is fantastic for pedaling up a hill, it's not always ideal for long saddle rides. So I'd say something between 75 and 76 will give you a nice cockpit length for just pedaling around long days in the saddle. If you're doing a lot of climbing and want to have a nice pedaling position, that 60 or 76 to 77 is ideal. But really anywhere between 75 and 77 is great, and then you can use the saddle to vary the effective pedaling degree by a little bit. So bikes that fall into that category, well, just look at the downcountry category. All of those bikes pretty much are targeted exactly to what you're looking for. They'll be shorter to mid-travel bikes, angles in this very range. They're going to be light, they're going to be snappy, probably something you're looking for. Now the other thing to consider is moving up into that 140 mil travel range. And there's plenty of trail bikes that still fit that bill really, really well. It's paying attention to the overall angles or the ability to change those angles. So I'm going to spit off a bunch of bikes here that fit into this category, and then I'll talk about two at the end that I think are most appropriate. So I'm talking about bikes like the YT Izzo, the Kone Hei Hei, Yeti SB130, and the Transition Spur. All of those fall neatly into that downcountry lineup, but have those angles that you're looking for. And those ones, though, are typically a shorter chainstay. I want to mention 3 models in particular that I think suit the bill the best. Now, I do sell them, obviously, but I sell them for this very reason. First up is the Banshee Prime and the Banshee Phantom. The Prime is a 135 millimeter travel bike. The Phantom is a 115 millimeter travel bike. They both already have longer chainstays to start, so 445 and 450 between the two models. But you can lengthen those rear ends, so you can increase them by 10 millimeters with a different dropout. In addition to that, they have a bit higher stack than normal bikes. So you're not going to be compromising the geometry or the reach of the bike and the cockpit of the bike when you try to move the front end up. The other one I recommend is the Deviate Highlander in the 140 millimeter travel configuration. Now it has a lower stack, which is okay. You can obviously increase that, but it has 2 things going on for it. One, the cockpit is a little bit bigger for pedaling with its 76 degree seat angle compared to the more 77 range you're going to find on the Prime and the Phantom. And being a high pivot bike, the chainstay starts at 440 but grows during compression. So as you push the bike into corners or you start landing, the wheelbase increases in the back end, creating a more stable bike as it cycles further into its travel. So those 2 brands and those 3 models I particularly like to highlight because they offer great stability in their configuration and amazing traction. All things I think that are very important for the cross-country rider, the older recovering cross-country racers type idea. One bike I'm going to throw into the mix too, if you are that dedicated hardcore cross-country racer and you want something that takes advantage of some of the newer geo that's going on there but still want that race feel, the NS Synonym is probably a great one to look at. It is essentially a cross-country race bike with downcountry geometry on it. Chainstay is 438 mil. Headtube angle is about 66. C-tube angle at about 76. So all right in that ballpark. And that 76-degree C-tube angle gives it a little bit larger of a pedaling cockpit. But everything else is straight up into the downcountry and borderline trail enduro setup. So there you have it. And if you want to talk more about it, feel free to drop me a line. And if you're in the area, obviously drop into the shop and we can discuss about what might suit you best.
Hey, thank you for watching, and make sure you check out ridermtb.ca for all of our incredible jerseys with amazing crash warranty at prices that you won't cry about when you crash and rip them. So ridermtb.ca. Thanks a lot.